So before you even watch this video, I would encourage you to try to do this problem yourself. Okay, try to do this problem yourself. So let's look at how this would be calculated. So this company, they manufacture gourmet snacks. They use activity-based costing. So what that tells us is they're not using only labor hours or labor cost to calculate applied overhead. They're using multiple drivers. So in this case, we've got 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Ordering and receiving drives cost, food processing drives cost, and so does packaging. So we're going to use our same calculation. Estimated overhead divided by the use of the cost driver gives us our rate. So how do we do that? Well, for ordering and receiving, 84,000 divided by 12,000 orders equals a $7 rate. Food processing divided by machine hours, that equals an $8 rate. And then packaging, pretty expensive. Think about Crumble Cookie in those expensive pink boxes, okay? Divided by the labor hours, that gives us a rate of 44. Now, it doesn't make sense to add these rates up or anything like that. We need to apply them separately to either a job or the process on a monthly or annual basis. So for 2022, you're given information that the company had 7,000 orders. They used 40,000 machine hours and labor hours of 25,000. So to calculate manufacturing overhead applied to the company, now this one we happen to be looking at the total company, we can do that, okay? If it was a job, we could look at just the job. So keep that in mind as you move forward in the homework. So 7,000 orders times a rate of 7 equals $49,000 of overhead applied. They use 40,000 machine hours times 8, that is 320. And then labor hours times our rate of $44, that gives us 1,100,000. Okay, so our total overhead applied equals 1,469,000. So really, chapter 17 is pretty quick. We're just thinking about the difference between using a traditional cost driver and an activity-based model that says, let's use multiple drivers. Okay, so we'll talk about that more in just a minute in the last video, but let's talk about down here, how could we review whether overhead is under or over applied? Well, I'm going to draw you 2 different scenarios here, okay? Just to again talk about this idea of over and under. So if this is our temporary account that tracks overhead, we know that MOH applied in both scenarios is this number. Okay, so minus manufacturing overhead applied. Because again, the whole point of this is to allocate all of our overhead cost. So if this is minus 1,469, and this is minus 1,469. Okay, so 2 different scenarios, 1 and 2. Remember, over here is our actual manufacturing overhead. That's our indirect materials, our indirect labor, and our actual bills for all of the other indirects. Okay, so what if our actual overhead was 1.5 million? That would mean that we are under applied because what we applied is less than what we actually incurred. And that difference is 31,000. And so if you remember from chapter 15A, what expense do we actually recognize? This is the actual expense we have to recognize. Okay, so that means we are going to increase our cost of goods sold expense by 31,000. Again, why? This is the only amount right here that went to jobs. And because of that, we actually incurred 1.5 million. We have to recognize that expense. Now, on the flip side, what happens if our actual overhead was only 1.4 million? That would mean if we applied 1,469,000, guess what? We are over applied. Just means we allocated too much cost. We didn't actually incur that much. What we actually incurred was 1.4. So I like to say, think about it this way. We go out to eat and we expect our bill to be $50, but it comes back at 100. We actually have to pay the $100. They're not going to let us out of there for 50. So we underestimated what we were going to have to pay. Now, if we go out to eat and we expect to spend 150 because we have a few extra friends with us and we only spend 100, well, we don't have to pay the 150. We didn't order enough food to get to that amount, but that's what we were planning on spending. We just overestimated. Okay, so that's the idea here. So in this case, we've overapplied by 69,000. What does that mean for cost of goods sold expense? We actually have to reduce it. And why do we reduce it? Because remember, what gets applied is what ultimately ends up in cost of goods sold expense. Now, real quick before we end this video here, how would our analysis up here change if we use traditional? So stop and think for just a moment. Using traditional uses what? That's correct, labor. So thinking about 40,000 labor hours, okay, if we're using one driver, we have to sum up this overhead. So what's our total overhead? Well, our estimate was 324,000. So when we calculate that, we do 2,324,000 divided by 40,000 labor hours. And if that's the case, we come up with about $58.10 per labor hour. Okay. And if we were going to apply overhead, we're going to come up with a little bit different number than this number that we used for activity-based costing. Okay. Why? Because now we're going to say if we used total labor of 25,000 hours times our rate of 58.10, that means we've got applied overhead of 1,452,500. So which one's right? Which one's wrong? Well, the idea is we have to think, one, activity-based costing is supposed to give us a better estimate. Two, what was our actual overhead applied? Well, if we chose traditional costing, we'd want to compare this to our actual. If we chose activity-based costing, we compare this to our actual. So the idea is which one gets us closer. And that's a summary and overview of our activity-based costing, which is the primary focus of chapter 17.